The first star went out without ceremony, as if some unseen hand pinched the filament of creation and smothered it between finger and thumb. Archon Telsar stood at the cathedral viewport of his flagship Verity of Glass and watched the second dim, then the third, each sun collapsing into a bruise of dark that instruments insisted was still there, merely unavailable to light. In the reflection on the pane, his people looked like they always had. Bodies sculpted from latticed crystal, faces veined with mineral fire. Beautiful, fragile, convinced for millennia that elegance and understanding would always be enough. Numbered systems lost, he asked, though the answer hovered like frost on everyone's tongues. 1,209, replied his tactician, a young chorister whose edges still held adolescent sparkle. And the choir advances. The thing consuming the arm of the galaxy did not call itself anything. We named it the Abyssal Choir because its approach was a silence so loud that it crushed signal, sensor, and hope. It did not transmit threats or ultimatums. It only arrived, ships like tumors, weapons like problems you could not factor. It learned. If you burned it, it returned insulated. If you cut it, it returned seamless. We refined, it adapted. Across 100 cultures, the same argument kept resurfacing. We built too fine. The Lumen, the energy-born who rode currents like music, had spent 10,000 years composing engines that danced rather than pushed. The hived Keth, whose queens braided thought across light seconds, could choreograph an entire battle like a school of fish turns on a single shimmer. And we Glassborn had perfected the art of slicing reality in clean lines. Quantum apertures no rougher than a whispered apology. It had made us powerful and kind. It had not made us ready. We made our stand where the lanes tangled. The crossroads gate, a knotted sculpture of transit that let a courier cross from rim to bulge in a single breath. There were 12 billion souls tucked into that system's belts and worlds, miners, scholars, children chasing thin-air kites above the equator storms of a gas giant. We summoned everyone who could still accelerate and shoot in the same direction. On the approach, the traffic looked like a migration of gods, 2,300,000 hulls bowing toward the same gravity well, as if prayer could be shaped into formation. The choir came in a sheet of nightmare. Organomech hulls flexed like a jaw. Something in their mass signatures read as alive, not metaphorically, not romantically, but like the readout you get when you put a stethoscope to a chest and count the beats. Their centerpiece bled darkness into the render, a moon-sized conductor that made light take the long way around as if embarrassed. We fired first because someone had to. Crystal lances stitched white scars across the void. The lumen arced storms blue-white and harmonic. The Keth vented 1,000,000 needle drones that flew like thought and bit like famine. For a handful of breathless minutes, the scoreboard looked like courage might still matter. Then the choir answered with its only trick and its horrific genius: learn, redesign, return. Our beams diffused on fresh-grown mirrors. Our storms puddled into new organic capacitors that drank lightning like milk. Our needles found themselves tipless against plates that had not existed an hour prior. The conductor did not so much deflect as deny, unmaking the math by which our weapons asserted they should work. "Time to inner orbit?" I asked. 4 hours, came the reply. It felt like being told exactly when your house would burn and having no water, only a very expensive poem about the philosophy of rain. We triggered the general cry, a band-wide call that even pre-jump cultures could capture and store for later translation. One line in every tongue: stand back from the core, prepare for the dark. If you can help, we will welcome you to the line. It was not strategy so much as civilization telling itself it was still one thing. Replies arrived like meteors, small and bright, the iridescent quartz, the brass hegemony, the free stoa, and almost as a footnote if you didn't know history, the Terran colonial service. Humans? I had read about them the way one reads about storms on distant maps. Young, loud, not in the choir of great powers. Their tools were thick where ours were fine, their solutions suspiciously close to hitting. Our survey files called their ships fortresses and moved on as if it were charming, like a child wearing armor made of cardboard. On the second hour, as the choir's front lapped at our pickets, comms said, "Incoming transit from exterior deep. Single signature. Drive profile, not in chart. It looks Archon, it looks wrong." The crossroads lattice is supposed to flex like silk when you enter because we understand how to draw a slit in the world without tearing it. The inbound tore. Every instrument howled. The aperture bulged like a wound. Radiation spiked. The glass of the viewport hummed. Some of my bridge closed faceted eyes and asked their ancestors for patience. Through a rent that would have pulped our hulls, something forced itself into being. 2 kilometers of unpleasant geometry, slabs and ribs and gun blisters, armor welded on armor until aesthetics surrendered and mass itself frowned. "I need a designation," I said, because words are a way to impose law when physics refuses. "Transponder in plaintext. USV Resolute," comms said, tasting unfamiliar syllables. "Origin, Terran." I watched history angle to a hinge. Our elegant century had failed so beautifully that all we had left to try was a species that built tanks that learned to fly. "Put them on," I said. A human face appeared, compact, severe, eyes with the color of old steel and the patience of a long winter. No ceremony on the uniform. No jewelry threaded through rank. Only the gravity of someone who slept under a desk too many times to count. "This is Admiral Maya Reed, Terran Colonial Service, aboard Resolute," she said, American English riding the vowels like road, blunt as a wrench. "We caught your cry on a relay situation." I told her numbers and failures, what we had burned and what the void had eaten. I said adaptive, immune, denies conservation, and 3 hours to the children at Gate 3. I did not ask them to run. I did not ask because something in her face told me that we had already been weighed and placed in a ledger under we showed up. "Copy," she said. "Any friendlies get hurt by kinetics so far?" The bridge went quiet with confusion, then with the awful suspicion of a door opening on an idea we had been too fine to consider. "We have not employed kinetic weapons in ship-to-ship since," I began. "Great," Maya Reed said, and she smiled, and it wasn't kind. "Then they haven't had a reason to learn." Outside the viewport, Resolute rolled, and the guns that looked like archaic decoration twitched toward the choir like someone choosing a jaw to punch. And for the first time since the night the stars dimmed, I felt a new emotion standing shoulder to shoulder with the old ones. Not hope, not yet, but curiosity, the moral cousin of hope. What happens if the universe stops being impressed and starts getting to work? "Archon," Reed said, voice level, "I need your traffic out of my lanes. Keep your beams off my nose. I'm about to make a mess." We yielded a corridor through the thickest battle of recorded memory. It felt improper, like moving art aside to make room for a bulldozer. But bulldozers build. You just have to admit what it is you're trying to move. There's a rhythm to annihilation. We had learned it by feel, clash, adaptation, attrition, retreat. The choir taught it to us like a teacher who only knows one lesson and keeps writing the same equation until your wrist cramps. Resolute entered a different meter entirely. Her first salvo did not look like warfare as we knew it. It looked like accounting. Numbers leaving barrels, numbers arriving at problems. Rail batteries ticked in a measured chuff, each shot a tungsten cylinder with a serial number and a destiny. Our passive sensors, trained by etiquette to listen, not shout, returned a smear. The human ship shouted instead, radar like drum, lidar like knives, a flood across bands we had archived as archaic. It lit its own silhouette like a bonfire and did not care. It was, in the most impolite sense, present. The kinetic rounds erased choir corvettes in a way that felt personal. There was no negotiation at impact, no revelation, no elegant interaction. A slug at an appreciable fraction of light speed does not enter into relationships. It arrives, and then everything local is about that. We watched organic armor yaw like torn fruit. We watched systems that had grown to taste voltages and swallow amps simply fail to find anything to drink in a rain made of mass. "Confirmed kills," my tactician whispered, as if too loud a voice would scare the math away. "Multiple," They are dying without adaptation. If the choir had a mind, it was a scientist. It tested inputs and remembered outputs. It cannot adapt to an input it has never measured because our pride said we were beyond it. We had curated our arsenal until it forgot what a brick felt like. The human solution on display was, philosophically, a brick hurled very, very fast. The choir tried. It thickened, grew ribs, softened, shaped cavities to yawn and catch. On the third exchange, you could see plates budding like callus. A slug crushed into a new cushion and still walked through, vaporizing, turning a unit of abyssal ship into a fog of regrets. You cannot grow fast enough to change the definition of momentum in flight. The second act began 13 minutes later when Resolute entered a garden of choir cruisers whose job had, until noon that day, been to embarrass the refined. Missile ports that had hidden like dimples erized, and a storm of metal flowers left racks on timed choreography, hundreds then thousands. I confess I flinched. Even among the unruly, there are standards. Nuclear fire in formation is the line where diplomats start composing language about taboos. There is a special cruelty to a detonation at knife range. Light outruns thought. You see sun for a heartbeat, and then the world arrives late to the idea that the neighborhood was remade. Resolute had built itself a chest whose rib cage was shield and spare shield and even more shield, and when the blossoms turned to newborn stars, she kept moving. Choir hulls did not. We saw 14 vanish into white in one pulse. We documented the physics, because that is what we were raised to do in the face of barbarism. Observe, quantify, feel the stomach, not later. Choir fire answered. The kind that had ablated our capital plates in neat surgical rectangles. The kind that had reached into lumen bodies and unraveled song. It hit the human hull and produced the ugliest result of the day, nothing narratively satisfying. Panels went black and then not. Racks folded, hissed, unlocked a twin behind them. You could build poetry out of our failures. You could only build checklists out of theirs. Secondary coolant loop engaged. Battery G offline. Battery H assuming fire. Hull breach isolated. 7 redundant atmospheres remaining. Everything about it smelled like someone's father who fixed the same machine 3,000 times and taught their child to own wrenches. "Archon," Reed said, crisp between salvos, "your lumen are getting eaten by whatever that big choir son is doing. Pull the energy born out of my sky. We'll give them a job when it's safe." No one had told a lumen to retreat from light in 10,000 years. We told them now, and they went, and something about that felt as holy as any hymn. The choir thickened around Resolute like a wound calls up scar. They attacked as if she were a contamination. The human response was an amoral rain. Point defenses lit in incandescent lines across her hull and stayed lit. We had a word for the choir's smallest flyers, motes, because it seemed polite to give a word to things that killed you. The PD shredded them faster than our translators could classify their corpses. There was a pattern in the fire we recognized. Not genius, not grace, policy. No corridor within X meters survives. No object with Y cross-section is allowed. It felt like fencing off a lawn from a swarm of locusts with a hurricane of nails, and as a connoisseur of beauty, I wanted to object. As an Archon, I watched my tally of living friendlies stop bleeding with such relief I had to grip the rail. "They should not be able to accelerate like that," my engineer murmured, watching Resolute pivot like it had invented mass. "They're inertial shunts. Do they even have?" The human ship provided its own answer by simply enduring. We saw spike loads that should have turned crew to paste. We saw restraints and suits and gel, and a dozen small concessions to biology that meant we will pay the bill and then fight anyway. Every culture writes a different sentence with the same words. We will not be comfortable if comfort costs someone else their life. The Terran punctuation mark on that sentence is a harness buckle and a promise. By the half hour, the choir had bent 100 vectors toward Resolute and still not learned new grammar. The lumen, pulled back into the shadow of our bulk, sang a warning. The conductor's voice was swinging its attention away from our million-note orchestra and onto the single drum that refused to stop beating. "Archon," Reed said, "I need your sky clear 30,000 clicks 4 of me and 10,000 behind. If you can't give me the ahead, give me the behind. We're about to change what the choir has to think about." We bled ships sideways to gift a road. She filled it with intent. When our historians tell this day to children who will be bored by heroism unless you lace it with jokes, they will choose 2 ideas to make the lesson carry. You can't bargain with momentum. And some things are designed to be still standing when everyone else sits down. Part Roman 3 is where the second idea took off its coat. The choir had a trick we hadn't seen at this scale: compression. A cluster of their heaviest hulls collapsed lanes like a fist around an egg. They weren't trying to kill Resolute with one blow so much as deny it the space to be. The right move in our playbook would have been to arc away and hum a new equation. Reed chose to stay. The word for what followed is simple and in our language unfashionable. She rammed. No song to it, no lineage, just mass making a thesis statement. A choir dreadform larger than any glass-borne cruiser took a bite out of Resolute's starboard armor and discovered it had chipped a tooth. The Terran ship bucked, screamed metal in a register we felt through our boots, and kept moving because everything that could break had a twin, and everything that could shear had 5 bolts, and everything that could explode had vents and a number to call. The quiet horror on my bridge belonged to people who had never put a dent in something on purpose. "Damage to Terran hull?" I asked, because the list would reassure me by its vulgarity. Our sensors, finally trusting the human flood of returns, scrolled down a page of compromises. Hull frames 2126 deformed, battery C down to 60% and uncouth about it. Crew bruised or worse, but belts and gel and stubbornness doing algebra together. Shock ran out from the impact like a rumor, breaking loosely attached things and testing prayers. The point was not that she bled. The point was that she was built with the prior knowledge that she would. Where we avoided the blow with grace, they swallowed it on purpose and wrote, "Try me again" across the bruise. Somewhere in Part Roman 3, a quiet philosophy turned out to be policy. The Terrans had accepted that a universe big enough to eat suns was big enough to hit you back, and calibrated survival around that boredom. That kind of pessimism reads like optimism to those of us who confuse manners with outcomes. The choir did a very choir thing. It retasked. The conductor's focus tightened to a needle and pushed an unbinding through local space, the same phenomenon that had unstitched lumen bodies earlier like seams coming loose. We'd watched it walk through hulls like a rumor through a family. Resolute shrugged it the way a properly hung door ignores wind. The sensors saw the surge. The hull saw a chore and closed sliders we could not name. Whether through layering of fields or an accident of righteous overbuilding, the human ship refused to come apart on demand. "Archon," Reed said, breath with gravel around it, "your queens, the Keth, tell them to stop trying to orchestrate me. They're brilliant, but they're writing music I can't dance to. I need them quiet for 90 seconds, and then I need everything." I am ashamed to admit the hardest order I gave all day was telling a hive queen to stop being perfect. Zach of 13 clicked an acknowledgement across the bands like breaking ice. 10,000 linked minds let go, trusting this barroom brawler with their children. The 90 seconds were vulgar. Resolute burned propellant like it was cheap and flexed her whole world around a straight line. We might tell the story later as if it were a duel because that is elegant, but it wasn't. It was a demo. PD lines splashed, missiles ripened, rails kept tempo like a factory shift bell. The choir could not push a shape into her, could not open a seam, could not convince that hull that it was time to die. At 89 seconds, the Keth came back like a spine resolving under skin. Target queues stacked. Choir logistics nodes, previously indistinguishable in the thriving mess, unfolded in the returns under the pressure of Terran active scan like bones in X-ray. We had always refused to glare at space because glare is rude. It turns out that glare shows you where the throat is. "Thank you," Reed said, and her rails said something unprintable to those throats across 2 light milliseconds. When a culture builds for grace long enough, it forgets how to read intent in a bruise. Watching the Terrans taught me the alphabet again. You stud a corridor with armor because you intend to use it when on fire. You triple a rack of batteries because you have seen a cold morning with your breath in it and a child to drive to school. You quench steel in old oil because that is what you have and you are late. Resolute was political philosophy expressed as redundancy. The choir did not break. It bent in the only way it knows, toward more choir. It poured hulls into the gap that Resolute made and then tore, widening, forcing the conductor forward in the same way a parent finally stands up when someone kicks dirt on a grave. Grave dirt fell across the crossroads. Our beams and arcs and needles decorated the scene like ribbons, and for once the ribbons were allowed to be what they were, supporting fire for a woman doing math with a hammer. "Archon," Reed said, voice thinner now like she'd paid for those 90 seconds out of muscle and sleep. "We're going to the conductor. I need the sky from here to there treated as if your own children are walking across it. You will see a charge ramp in our spine you will not like. You will want to tell me not to. Do not tell me not to." "What is it?" I asked, because naming is how we pretend to participate. She looked past me to some private window only she could see. "Where I'm from," she said, "we call it the Mass Lance. It's just a rock and a lot of electricity, but it's the right rock." In the viewport, the choir's center darkened like a storm making its own noon. Planets teach humility to those who insist on building near weather. The choir had made weather out of law. Its conductor curved the world around itself into obedience, and obedience feels like religion if you bathe in it long enough. We had written scripture explaining why our beams failed, why our arcs were consumed, why our math needed footnotes when near that hull. The human decision was to stop writing footnotes. The spine of Resolute glowed, not pretty. Rivets sang. You could see heat signature through plates meant to keep secrets. Something in the keel that wanted to remain named coil instead of alter took current until language frayed and then kept taking it. The Mass Lance was a long phrase for a short idea. Throw a thing so fast the universe has to respect it. "Distance?" I asked. 15,000, my chorister breathed. In our doctrine, that is a handshake. In theirs, it is close enough to be rude. The Lumen, long taught to let instruments do proud, quiet work, found themselves counting along with the human readouts, not because they believed, but because believing was simpler than recalculating under this pressure. The conductor performed its God trick again, eating light that tried to describe it, and exhaling a field whose only grammar we could translate was no. Battles have timbers, and you can hear when one creaks before it snaps. The choir of our allied ships, our living orchestra, grew cautious because you do not crouch near a friend about to swing a tree. "All ships," I said on the command band. "If you are within 100,000, you are wrong. Move and be grateful. If you are within 200,000, pray where you are and do not open your eyes. The Terrans are about to do something that doesn't need you in it." I watched 1 billion tons of friend move and scatter like startled animals, and I loved them all for their compliance with a sentence that centered trust. Resolute's drive signature stepped beyond the vocabulary our consoles offered. The wedge of her field flexed and set its teeth. The rails shut up, the PD quieted into a hum, the missiles found their lockers again. A ship that had been speaking in verbs all afternoon took a breath shaped like a noun. "Archon Telsar," Reed said, and the tightness in her voice now was not strain. It was quiet, the kind you hear in a shop when the last bolt is set and the old mechanic nods once. "Thank you for your lane. Keep it. If this goes right, you'll need it." "If it goes wrong?" I asked, because someone had to press the bruise. She allowed herself a small sound that might be mistaken for humor by a species who had more time for it. "Then the future gets very clean very fast." Keth Queen Zack clicked through the band with all the percussion in her compound eyes. "Terran, for the 30 heartbeats after your strike, we will act like one limb. Tell us where to clench." "Center line," Reed said. "Kill coordination nodes. Kill anything that tries to be a brain." The conductor uncurled a tendril of law and reached for Resolute's ramping field. We saw bridging phenomena we had only predicted on chalk. The human hull shivered its soul and did not hand it over. Somewhere on our decks, a child of a junior engineer gasped because his parent had just whispered a prayer in the old language, and we are not a praying people. When the mass lance spoke, it did not speak to us. It spoke to the conductor and to the road between and to every equation that thought it had standing. We did not see a missile leave. We saw a shadow peel off the nose, a cylinder as modest as a truth. 50 meters of tungsten that history will one day display behind glass, with a plaque about hubris and simple tools. The first meter of its path invented heat the local vacuum had not trained for. The second made a bow wave in nothing that our instruments called artifact and our eyes called glare. It reached the conductor before my bridge could close its mouths for a second sentence. There are clean annihilations and dirty ones. There are righteous and regrettable. The conductor was a problem that had made itself a god, and the problem with gods is not that they demand worship. It is that they believe they are immune to being reminded. Tungsten does not worship, it reminds. I will not pretend we saw the impact. We saw a corona of everything having an opinion at once. We saw edges get jealous of centers and trade places at a velocity that made our best metaphors look tired. We saw a ring of choir ships stagger like boxers learning to be born again. Silence is a lie in space. You always have numbers. And yet there is a kind of silence that instruments participate in out of respect. We had that for 3 breaths. Post-strike, Zack ticked, already braiding her minds. We have disorder in hostile net. Targeting nodes, there, Lumen, sing, Glassborn cut, now. The sky moved, Resolute drifted. Her heat map coughed. Her rails stayed modest. The ramp coil went the color of old blood cooling. Somewhere inside that bulldozer of a ship, people who had strapped in and paid out their spines to the gods of acceleration began to wake. Admiral Reed, I said, because all polite things should be said even when you think you might be talking to a ghost. Report. Her face came back to us, lit ugly from below by a workstation and by the aftermath of decisions. She looked older in the way clocks age. Stand by, she said. If the choir still knows how to pray, it will be doing it now. In the middle distance, the conductor's silhouette tried to reassemble the idea of itself, and failed with an honesty I had not expected from a god. And that is where the story holds its breath, not because there are not 100 more things to do and 1,000 more to fix and 10,000 funerals to schedule, but because when cause meets effect this hard, even a war bows its head for a second to watch. When gods fall, they do not hit the ground, they hit language. For 3 breaths after the mass lance arrived, every instrument we owned pretended to admire the scenery. Then the numbers stampeded back. The conductor's signature didn't vanish so much as lose the power to insist on being central. Its event-slick hide tried to reseal, failed, then bled equations it had stolen. The choir around it, an army that had once moved like choreography, convulsed into arguing parts. A hostile net desynchronized. Zakov 13 crackled, her mind choir cutting through the glare. Strike vectors free, now. You could feel the galaxy decide to live. Lumen arcs returned in narrow spears, not grand symphonies, surgical, mean. Our crystal lances didn't waste themselves in sheets. They stitched throats and knotted arteries, guided by Terran active scan that still flooded the battle space like weather reports from a planet that never learned to whisper. Everything elegant we had brought became suddenly sharp when someone else agreed to do the heavy lifting. Resolute drifted like a boxer who had just put a hole in the world with a right hook and was willing to let his knees have opinions for a minute. Heat peeled off her plates in waves. Her coils looked like gilt cooling. Across her hull, maintenance bots, barrel-chested barnacles in our magnified view, scuttled and popped access hatches with the same bored competence as someone changing a tire in the rain. Admiral Reed, I said, and I heard the hush in my own voice as if I'd come into a chapel by mistake. If you can give me guns, say it. If you need to be carried, say that instead. Her face arrived a heartbeat later, gray with the kind of fatigue that has a calendar. The light undercut the lines around her mouth. She glanced aside to a status column we could not see and then back, not to me, but to the concept of responsibility. "We're dry on main," she said. "Secondaries are good. Rails at 30% and climbing. PD still rude. If you can keep the sky off my nose for 2 minutes, I'll be impolite again." 2 minutes, Zack answered before I could. 10,000 Keth ships flowed like a single animal across Resolute's bow. We had learned to admire their grace. Today I loved their obedience to purpose more. Choir hulls, cut from the same stubborn biology as the conductor, did not die quietly. They turned inward like wolves that had lost a handler, snapping at whichever flank twitched. Where their logic had once flowed downhill from an apex mind, it now puddled in local impulses. Eat that, grow this, hate the bright. Some attempted a retreat we had never seen from them, unbeautiful, frantic, colliding with their neighbors. Others spooled up meat cannons and fling organs to spew fresh hate toward Resolute's smoking silhouette. "Lumen," I said onto the command band, "draw their eyes. No heroics, only annoyance." The energy-born understood immediately, flickering in and out like fireflies, throwing harmless brightness at sensors that had just lost a tyrant. Annoyance is a warfare not all cultures respect. The Lumen learned to. Rails on Resolute came back like a cough turning into a laugh. The first salvo after the lance was smaller, angrier, unmistakably human, pragmatic violence with a calorie count. Tungsten stitched a retreat corridor that had not existed, and suddenly there was a lane between the conductor's falling black mass and the crossroads gate. We had asked for a miracle. What we received was an evacuation plan. "Archon," Reed said, "you told me there were 12 billion souls in system. Start moving them. We'll keep the boulder rolling downhill." People like me, raised to curate reality until it behaves, want to polish a sentence before we sign it. Something in me still wanted to argue for order. We must secure the perimeters. We must... "Yes," I said, surprising myself with how quickly the word arrived. "Gate traffic priority, families, hospitals, unarmed work crews, military last." I caught my own reflection in the viewport as I gave the order. The mineral fire in my face had a new angle to it, not brightness. Resolve. We had spent years writing doctrine about how to engage the choir without feeding it. In the end, the doctrinal update that mattered fit in a child's handwriting. Do not give it a brain to steal. The mass lance had taken care of the immediate case. Now we learned the maintenance schedule on our victory. Without the conductor, choir hulls still killed anything they reached, so we arranged that they would reach each other. Keth Queens braided decoy vectors across the scrum. Lumen flashes became false food. We used our crystal beams not to kill, but to nudge, trimming fins, clipping tendons, turning hunger 90 degrees at a time until predator met predator. It looked heartless. I will spend time with a counselor later and tell them about that. "Battery F online," someone said behind Reed, and whoever it was sounded like they had never been granted a Christmas until now. "Don't celebrate," Reed said without turning. "Finish the list." A small, ugly beauty, human crew voices carried the same rhythm as their ship, checkbox cadence, no wasted vowels. I felt a brief, inexplicable envy for a culture whose courage had an operating manual. We lost ships still, of course we did. Choir fragments, desperate and uncoordinated, slammed into our lines with the feral efficiency of avalanches. On my board, red lights bloomed and died, and I signed too many letters to too many families in my head. But the curve shifted. The rate of loss bent downward and then broke. You could feel morale not so much sore as untie a knot. "Main coil at 12%, a human voice called. 16, 21. "Hold," Reed said. "Rails and PD will carry. We don't need pretty, we need done." There is a kind of leadership that makes history because it permits no poetry in the hour when poetry most wants to volunteer. I had thought our civilization led like a lantern. Reed led like a shop with the lights half on at midnight, bolts lined in trays, someone wiping their hands on a rag that has stories. By the end of the second minute, the conductor's corpse had stopped pretending to be theory. It was debris and hot shame. The choir, not busy dying, tried to understand where the idea of itself had gone, and being a biology that had learned to eat solutions did the only thing left. It ate itself. I gave the only order that felt holy. Stop shooting anything that is killing a different anything. Let entropy do a turn for us. Copy, Reed said. Love when physics does overtime. Past the gate, the traffic indicators flipped from yellow to green to a tired, satisfied gray. Kids with thin air kites would get to grow up and complain about homework. The crossroads would hold. Civilization, which is just a word for neighbors who keep promising each other tomorrow, would have another tomorrow to spend. We did not cheer. We checked. We counted. We found the living first. 3 hours later, our war room, really a solid piece of sculpture with too many chairs, received a woman who looked as if the day would only end when she permitted it. Admiral Maya Reed wore a uniform you could fix a ceiling fan in. The Terran crest on her chest was a star made by hands. Behind her came a man with oil on his knuckles and a medtech with a bruise like a map of home. If we are what we bring into rooms, the Terrans brought work. We began as winners do, with the names of the lost. I spoke first for the Glassborn. Vel our lumen high, flickered lower, then higher, then found his center to intone 2,700 names that had been sung 2 days ago. Zach of 13 tipped her head, antennae still for the length of sorrow, and whispered the stilled clicks of 4 sister queens who had not survived the choir's psychic knife. Reed bowed, not militarily, not theatrically, like someone in a doorway taking off their hat. We owe you, Vel began. Reed cut him off by raising a hand to exactly the height a person uses to stop a loved one before they become embarrassing. You owe us nothing, she said. American vowels like gravel on a road we could all walk. You asked, we came. If the map were different, you'd have shown up in our sky. Elegance tends to thank at length. Work tends to move to agenda. I surrendered to the pull. Admiral Reed, we need to understand your doctrine before we misteach it to ourselves. What did we just watch? And what will you not allow us to copy? She looked at our models of the battle frozen mid-chaos, at the knife of Resolute's path, at the ragged ring where the conductor had stopped being an opinion. You saw 3 ideas, she said. 1, if your enemy eats sophistication, feed it something simple. Kinetics are older than pride. The choir hadn't trained for a rock. 2, build to get hit, not because you like it, because reality is mean and accidents stay after class. 3, redundancy isn't waste if the alternative is extinction. Zach's mandibles clicked. Your nuclear practice, indiscriminate by our code. Reed's jaw worked once, a muscle remembering other rooms. Agreed, you'll find we have codes too. We use them when we can. Today we couldn't. We detonated where we calculated collateral would be choir biomass and empty space. We brought too much shield because we knew we'd hurt ourselves. If you want our playbook, you also get our constraints. No nukes near cities, no burning atmospheres, no war crimes dressed up as math. We carry a toolbox, not a crown. I wanted to believe this without work. The universe prefers inspections. The mass lance, I said. How many of those do you carry? Enough to lose sleep, Reed said. Not enough to get lazy. Vel brightened and dimmed like breath. Your ship accelerated at 200 gravities. Your crew? Belts, gel, training, stubbornness, she said. Also our risk. We choose to carry it. We don't export it to bystanders. Our engineer, who had been politely silent while rearranging his entire education, cleared his throat. Admiral, forgive a personal question. Who taught you to build like this? Reed's mouth softened at the edges. My mother ran a machine shop 3 blocks from the shipyard that built the first rails we're still improving. She said, if it breaks where you expect it, you did your job. If it breaks where you didn't, you get to learn. So we design where it's allowed to break. Then we stack backups in the places that must not. Zach inclined. This is pessimism elevated to art. Reed shrugged. We call it being neighbors with weather. The conversation turned to contagion of practice. What to adopt, what to keep. We sketched a doctrine we would later print on laminated cards that fit in flight suits. Fine, keep elegance when it wins quickly and doesn't teach the wrong lesson to the wrong enemy. Loud, When the adversary learns from finesse, go noisy, active sensors, obvious lanes, make them look at the wrong things. Stubborn, build to outlast. Redundancy as culture, not apology. Vel asked the political question we'd all tiptoed around. Humanity's intention then? Expansion, stewardship, solitude. Reed looked genuinely tired for the first time, not with work but with having had to answer this before. We want a seat at the table where we're already cooking and washing dishes. No empires, no sermons. We'll help build the fire breaks and the schools. We're bad at pretending to be small, so we won't. But we don't take things we didn't earn. You will accept mutual oversight, I said, part test, part hope. You bet, she said. We like friends who check our math. It would have been easy to end the meeting with poetry and a salute. Instead, Reed reached into a satchel, pulled a dog-eared manual, slid it across our glass. TCS Field Guide, Surviving Bad Days, coffee stain, torn corner, page on makeshift shielding, thumbed near through. Copy it, she said. Translate it, toss half. Keep the half you hate, that half saves you. We did not vote, we did not draft 1,000 clauses. We shook hands, facets, light, chitin, skin, and promised to be around next time someone screamed. The battlefield quieted into salvage and statistics, which is adulthood's way of saying we won. Wreckage lanes spun out like stitches. Choir fragments still twitched where they had been taught to look for orders. Some learned to die, some needed help learning. We built a task force with a name we pretended to dislike and a logo we loved too much, the Fire Break. Humans brought Resolute and 2 sister hulls whose keels still smelled like shipyard. We brought a sky full of microscopes and polite rage. Politics arrived late, as it does when death has been busy. The courts of iridescence wanted a treaty that measured exactly how big a Terran hammer gets before it needs a committee. The brass hegemony wanted to license the mass lance as if physics were a patent. The Free Stoa wanted minutes and votes, and the kind of arguments that keep lights on all night. In the old days, I would have enjoyed the choreography. Now I watched Reed flip to the last page of every draft and write, "We show up, we clean up, we don't rule, seat not throne." Fear of inefficiency became the fashion again. Your designs are wasteful, an iridescent minister said delicately to a Terran engineer whose hands were a topography of old work. Tripled systems, redundant pipes, surely you could be lighter. The engineer, Paulo, according to the patch, grinned the way people do when they would like to be nice but the day's civility rations have run out. Light flies great, he said. Then something goes wrong and light dies great. What do you want to be great at? We compromised like grown species. Humans agreed to share practices rather than hulls. How to layer fields so an unbinding becomes a chore instead of a funeral. How to stage power for a lance without turning friendlies into shadows on walls. In exchange, we gave them what elegance is good at, making sensors that didn't cook their own operators, drafting corridors through reality that didn't rip like cheap cloth. We called it the trade of temperaments. Journalism called it the alliance of taste and grit and sold posters. Within a week, Firebreak burned 3 choir pockets that had begun to crown themselves petty conductors. The tactic was simple in the way we now trusted. Humans built a lane with noise and promise. Keth Queens braided feints. Lumen flashed and fled. Glassborn sliced seams. A lance or a rail chorus arrived when the pocket forgot what century it lived in. We lost friends because war taxes kindness, but we did not lose direction. Every funeral we attended had a footnote. This is the last time that trick will work on us. In the war room where treaties ferment, the question of authority hardened to a point. A seat, the courts repeated. Define seat. Reed leaned into the table with the body language of someone who has learned that furniture behaves if you behave first. A vote, a voice, a share in the work, veto on nothing, consent on use of the lance, mutual right to call an audit if any of us starts dressing fear as law. Conditions? Zach asked, predator still. 2, Reed said. You don't use us as scarecrows at the border, and you don't teach our kids to worship us. We're not the story, we're a chapter. There were speeches. There are always speeches in new chapters. I gave one shorter than my reputation. Vel sang one that made our air glow. Reed gave the only kind she knows, inventory with an emotion at the end. In our houses, she said, we keep kits for bad days, water, radios, flashlights. We take turns baking for funerals. We shovel each other's sidewalks. This, she tapped the treaty, is the same thing writ big. You will hate our methods sometimes. We will roll our eyes at your meetings. But when the alarm sounds, no one asks for your pedigree. We ask, are you here? We voted. Seats shuffled. The table expanded in the old literal way. We added wood. Terran sat among us, not above, not below. That night in the Crossroads low-gravity memorial garden, I found a Terran petty officer teaching a Keth juvenile how to tie a bowline using a length of decommissioned rail barrel as a bench. On a nearby plinth, names etched in 3 scripts caught the light. The petty officer tightened the knot, tugged, nodded. Won't slip, he said. That's the point. The Keth child clicked approval, 3 notes that meant useful. Civilization is just that lesson on repeat. 6 months later, the lanes sang again, timid at first, then confident the way a healed limb remembers how to lift a child. The choir had not vanished, nothing that learns ever truly dies. But the apex mind was a rumor now, and its fragments behaved like storms in a season with good roofs. You check the windows, you call your neighbor. You bring in the laundry early and tell a story by candlelight for the drama, not the fear. We rebuilt the Crossroads with a concession to the future. Thick, not ugly, not human, but no longer a sculpture pretending to be a bridge. Where we had once hidden strength like a sin, we set it out like proud bread on a table, beams layered, fields cross-braced, emergency shunts printed into the bones. We learned from Terrans how to put handles on things so they could be grabbed by hands in a hurry. They learned from us how to make those handles beautiful without losing the grip. Shipyards across a dozen cultures launched hulls that embarrassed their architects in private. You cannot overbuild without overfeeling, and some of us with glass blood flinched at corners that refused to taper. Then we went aboard, ran drills, killed a pocket of choir that dared gather near a nursery moon, and came home to find the same corners comforting. Our art did not die, it changed flavors. The first glass-born heavy with Terran redundancies left a wake that tasted like a cathedral promised it would never collapse on a choir. The Lumen, who had once found the conductors unbinding creeping up their bodies like a chill no blanket stops, composed insulator hymns, fields woven through their light so that hostile law slid off like rain on wax. They still sang in gorgeous arcs. Now they also carried umbrellas. The Keth invented a vocabulary for deliberate imperfection, adding noise to their own perfect choreography so that no enemy could ever count them to death again. Watching a hive choose to be unpredictable is like watching a river decide to walk. Humans did the least photogenic work and therefore the most important. They opened schools under names you can teach to kindergartners. Fix-It House, Safe Kit, Bad Day Class. They taught children of every biology how to fill a bag with light, maps, water, stubbornness. They taught our engineers the ritual of after-action checklists, which look boring until you realize they are literature about staying alive. Admiral Reed stayed longer than her orders required, and exactly as long as her conscience did. When the last major pocket broke itself open on Firebreak's lanes and lay down to rust, she let Resolute's crew hang their harnesses to dry. We gathered at the gate under banners that meant not conquered in 7 alphabets. Say it pretty, Vel murmured, nudging me toward a dais I hated less than I used to. I looked out over a crowd that had learned to clap for maintenance crews and to cry for dispatchers. We thought civilization was a vase, I said. We were wrong, it's a toolbox. Today we add a wrench. There was laughter in the way of relieved species. Reed didn't smile much, but when she did, it looked like a green light. Treaties thickened into habits. The consent on lance use became not a leash but a chorus response. Any species contemplating god-tier kinetic reminded itself to call 3 friends first. We wrote our oversight into calendars, not just constitutions. Once a quarter, a Terran tech and a glass-born artist co-taught a class called Make It Strong. Make it kind. Children brought in broken things and left with fixed ones and the logic of fixing. In private, I asked Reed the question I had avoided because I feared the simple answer. Why did you really come? She considered the ceiling as if it kept stories. We have a saying where I'm from, she said. Bad day, bring soup. The galaxy had a bad day, we brought soup and a hammer. And yes, the hammer was loud, but the soup mattered too. We stood together at the viewport where, months before, we had watched a god choke on humility. Stars burned properly again, not with the panicked brightness of weapons, but with the domestic light that means someone is home. Freighters stitched between them with bellies full of grain and textbooks and 1,000 repair parts that say we intend to stay. Archon Telsar, Reed said, holding out a palm with callus and a small scar like a map of a river delta. We good. I set crystal to skin, feeling the granularity of labor meet the geometry of light. We are better than we were, I said, and we will keep each other honest. She gathered her people with the quiet cruelty of good leaders, rest now, and boarded Resolute. The ship turned her ugly, beautiful face toward a lane we had built together, paused in the universal body language of farewell, and went. Later, when children ask me what lesson we learned, I will not tell them about tungsten or unbinding or the way an event horizon tastes when it lets go. I will tell them a smaller thing that contains all the rest. When the alarm sounds, go. Bring what works. Fix what breaks. Build so that a stranger can use your tools without asking permission. And remember the line a human wrote on a treaty under a coffee stain. As long as we're in it, nobody fights alone.